Welcome back. Uncertainty and stochasticity are the very nature of supply chain. Today's guest, Dr. Meinolf Sellmann, is no stranger to this. He's an award-winning computer scientist, a decorated AI researcher, and he's the CTO at InsideOpt. And today, he's going to talk to Joannes and me about decision-making under uncertainty. Meinolf, you're very welcome to Lokad.
Thank you so much, Conor, and very nice meeting you, Joannes. Look forward to the discussion.
Well, good, and thank you very much for joining us. Apologies for the brief intro. I do like to get straight to the guest, but the consequence of that is I don't do justice to the background of who we're talking to. So could you please, first of all, forgive me, and then fill in some of the blanks in terms of your background, how you got to where you are now?
Sure. I think you've covered the gist. So I'm an optimization person at heart. That's kind of what drove my diploma thesis. So the German system there is very similar to the French one. And actually, the diploma thesis consisted in building a mixed integer programming solver for a computer algebra system. So even since the early student days, I've been on this kind of decisioning side. And can you use computers in order to arrive at better decisions? And yeah, then stations were postdoc at Cornell, professor at Brown, then senior manager at IBM, technology director at GE, and then director at Shopify, and now CTO at InsideOpt. Through this journey, you can kind of see that more and more machine learning has kind of crept into the mix. So the traditional optimization is kind of deterministic optimization. You have kind of complete knowledge of everything that is going on. You're just trying to find the best course of action. And yeah, the moment you actually get in touch with practice, you realize that isn't so. And so you need to bring in more and more technology that allows you to make decision-making under uncertainty. And that is really what hypes us here at InsideOpt.
Well, thank you. And again, you mentioned a lot of big names there in terms of your background at IBM, General Electric, and Shopify. Without violating any potential NDAs, what details or experiences might have most greatly influenced your perspective on forecasting and decision-making now that you're at InsideOpt?
So look at an industry like the airline industry. Traditionally, super high spend on optimization. It's one of the areas or one of the industries that probably has invested the earliest and also the most over the decades in optimization technology. And then look at how much fun it is to run an airline. So it's like they get awesome plans, right? They get crew plans. So what do they have to decide? They need to decide which pilot is on what plane, what flight attendants are on what plane, what planes to use for which legs. They also need to decide what kind of legs to offer, right? So what direct flights to offer, and then how to make them into routes. They need to do revenue management. For all of these decisions, operational decisions, they're using optimization. And on paper, those plans look fantastic. I mean, they usually come, if not with provable optimality, then with some performance guarantee. But then if you operate an airline, you know that you're losing your shirt on the day of operation, because then things are slightly different. Right? The weather isn't what you expected it to be. The air traffic controllers in France feel like they are not being paid enough. The gate is full.
In the break room, yeah.
Some equipment breaks, right? So all of those things that can go wrong. And if you've ever flown, you know that the airline is, so the motto is, if today is screwed, then today is screwed. Let's make sure tomorrow isn't screwed. And that's how they treat you, right? They don't care that you're going to get where you need to go today. They want to be back in the plan tomorrow, because if they come with a bad situation into tomorrow, then tomorrow will be screwed also. And so what does it tell you? It tells you that optimization suffers from over-optimism, that everything will go according to plan. Let's put it that way. And that's what we want to change.
Well, thank you. Joannes, does that align with your take?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, for me, it was very intriguing, because I only discovered relatively late the very notion of stochastic optimization. I mean, I was very familiar in my 20s with the regular optimization, convex optimization, read entire books on these sort of things. And so the sort of classic optimization that start with linear algebra and and things like the Danzig algorithm and whatnot. Those things are literally taught not in high school, but just afterward. And then I had studied for a few years when I was student operation research. Sorry, that's the traditional name given to the topic. And again, you can go through literally hundreds of pages of cases where you have like factories, planes, all sort of allocations of assets, machines, people, and whatnot. And yet, at no point they ever discuss the elephant in the room, which is stuff you've just have a modelization of the situation that might be incorrect, and then all the stuff that you optimize end up exceedingly fragile. And I think actually the moments where I realized how deep the rabbit hole went was reading the book Anti-Fragile from Taleb. That was quite a while ago, but then I realized, so there was like something that was a missing paradigm that was really obvious, really ubiquitous, and then yes, I started to get generally very interested into this sort of optimization, and then yes, it's for me the thing that is most surprising is how absent it is from literally entire bodies of literature that treat as if this idea of uncertainty of not knowing perfectly your loss function. It's literally a missing color. There is a missing dimension, and it's harder to see what you don't see. You see, it's not like it is wrong. It is more like there is an entire dimension that is absent to a very large, very extensive, very old field of studies otherwise.
Well, actually, if I can follow up on that, because again, when you mentioned the idea of like missing paradigms and things that are entirely absent, it juxtaposes nicely with one of the reasons why we actually reached out to you, Meinolf, because your perspective on what we might call mainstream or traditional planning, forecasting, inventory policies, typically falls into a sort of forecast first, make decisions second approach, which is paradigmatically quite different to what I think everyone in the room would advocate. So first, I'll throw it to you. Could you sketch out the differences there, so the traditional approach and then the missing paradigms that you and Joannes espouse?
Yes. So as you can imagine, right? If you run, so say for example you run a fulfillment system. So what does that mean, right? You have an e-commerce store, and you need to put somewhere in your warehouse the products that that you're hoping people will buy. The inherent problem that you run into is that you don't know how much will be bought where. So you somehow need to you need to formulate an expectation. Let's put it that way, right? So you kind of need to make a forecast, is what we call, or prediction more generally. And there are people who do that for you, and this is typically your machine learning department. So these guys know everything about, there is missing values over here, right? So say you had stockouts at some point, so which means that you don't really know how much would have been sold because you were out. So you don't actually know how much you could have sold if you had more. They deal with outliers, with missing values, with noise, and everything that's uncertain. And out of this, they make a forecast, a prediction. And then you have that second department, which Joannes was saying quite correctly. These folks don't generally deal with uncertainty, so they go like, "Oh, great prediction! Let's shove that into my optimization model," as if it were, given by the Oracle of Delphi or something. So it's like, as if you had perfect knowledge of the future. You just treat these numbers that you have there and you say, my demand for sunscreen next week is 20 tubes. So let's put them on the shelf, not looking at any variability that is there. And so it's partly, so this predict then optimize, this is what it's called, is partly due to the fact that you have two different departments that have very different skill sets. And it would be very, very difficult for you to say, oh, the machine learners now need to learn everything about optimization, or maybe the optimizers need to learn more about machine learning. So this is typically what companies would shy away from. That's one reason why that separation exists. The piece to this is, though, that if you're handing uncertainty from one department to the other, it doesn't go away. So just by ignoring it, you're actually leaving a lot of money on the table. And that is the second reason why people don't look into this more closely, because it sounds to them, okay, the machine learners did their job. They came back, they do things like after they build a model, or they kind of did everything that needs to be done in order to train a model, and then they test their machinery through something that is called, for example, a cross-validation. So you would go into known data and you would say, hey, if I had only had this snippet of data and I would have had to make a prediction for the other part of the data, how well would that have done, right? So like this, you can kind of convince yourself that, hopefully you're going to get very, very good predictions out of the machine learning department. And they do that, and you control that, and you go like, oh, this is awesome, right? They have good predictions. And then the optimizers come back anyway, and they will say either have a performance bound or, hey, I have a probably optimal solution over here. So you wouldn't expect, if you're running a company, that there's any room for improvement by making these departments work better together. And in reality, you can very easily, 15% is nothing. I mean, it's like 15, 20, 25% better operational results if you actually take the variability in the forecast into account when you're doing the optimization. But people don't see that, right? So partly it's structural, that this predict and optimize persists so much that you don't want to mix skills. The other part is that you don't see that by intermingling these things more closely, how much you're actually leaving on the table. Because it sounds like, hey, awesome forecast, provable optimality, great. The rest is just the cost of doing business. And it's not. It's not. I think this is what Joannes and I are here to tell you, the audience today, right? This is not the cost of doing business.
Well, Joannes, is that the cost of doing business? Is Meinolf correct?
Yes, and also I think there is another dimension, is that the idea of mastering, conquering the future, so that you just remove the uncertainty entirely. It has been for almost a century a very, very seductive idea. I mean, the Soviet Union collapsed, but the idea of making 5 years ahead grand plan and having everything orchestrated down the plan didn't die with the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union, at some point, I think they had something like 30 million products that they had to price and forecast 5 years ahead. And I mean, it was overall a complete and utter failure, and just the pragmatical level, but there is, I think, what few people realize, that the appeal of this idea didn't die with the Soviet Union. It still has, especially for, let's say, intellectuals, academics, the idea that you could frame the future of the world in a way where you will have your forecast, and that's going to be the truth with a big T. And then it's just a matter of orchestration. It feels like, plus I believe it also resonates with certain types of management, because it has this very top-down approach where, here is the path ahead, and now everybody, orchestrate that. So it has this appeal of simplicity. Obviously, this is fallacy, because you're not in control. Your clients have their own agencies. They can decide other things. Your supplier try to do their best, but sometimes their best is still not very good. Plus you have shocks. Sometimes it's something very dramatic, like a war. Sometimes it's something very dumb, like a ship that is being stuck in the Suez, in the canal of Suez, and bam, you've got all your imports that are delayed due to do a dumb event. But whatever the cause, it is, the future is messy. Plus, yes, I mean, it's very hard to suddenly to rationalize this sort of chaos. It's harder to reason about. Reasoning about the perfect future is simple. Is that stop? That would be the sort of feedback we were getting the early years of Lokad was, Mr. Vermorel, just give us accurate forecasts. Accurate. Stick to a 3% error and be done with it. And obviously, if we had been able to deliver that, then there would not have been any true upside into commingling or joining the forecasting and the optimization. But here we are, I would say 15 years down the road, even if Lokad is doing very well forecasting wise, for most businesses 3% inaccuracy is just ludicrous. We are not even close to that, and it's never going to be close to that at the SKU level.
Yes.
Well,
it sounds so harsh, right? To compare industrial practice with the Soviet Union sounds so harsh, but so I won't name any names, but I saw an ad of a famous MIP solver the other day, where they said, "Hey, using our MIP solver, this airline now optimized its 5-year plan." And I think I left a comment that Khrushchev would be so proud. It is true. It is true. It has a lot of appeal to say, hey, I can forecast the future. AI is awesome. And then I optimize for it and boom, now I'm good.
Yeah, and I think, the appeal of the ideology, I think people would dismiss that, I'm pro-market, I'm not communistic, but they miss that what was making this sort of ideology so appealing. Even if you go in academia, you will frequently find people who are really, proponent of those visions, and they have an intellectual appeal that is very strong. I mean, I've been frequenting academia, and indeed, the idea of being in control of your future, is very appealing. The idea of being able to apply top-down some kind of scientific methods and rationalize, not at a superficial level, but really from the top with a big plan, and it's fully rational, top to the bottom. I mean, it's, on paper, it looks like modern management. It turned out that it's not actually modern management, but rather modern mismanagement. But I can feel, I would say, the appeal and the appearance of rationality, although it comes with side effects that are iatrogenics, things that are unintended, but fundamentally undesirable, that are very, very strong and that completely undermine those plans, and where you end up with supposedly optimal decisions that turn out to be impossibly fragile, where the slightest deviation just blow in your face in ways that are quite surprising, actually.
Yes. I think this is probably the most common fallacy, right? That people think, okay, so maybe I can't forecast the future perfectly, but even if there are slight deviations, my decisions will likely more or less be the same. And that is exactly what isn't true, right? So this kind of continuous change that you would expect just isn't there in practice. And that is why, even though it sounds so rational, make a forecast and then base a decision on it, it's actually the most irrational thing that you can do. You should expect that you don't have access to all the information that you should be having. And actually, the rational approach is to do what Lokad does, what we build our solver for here at InsideOpt, is to take the variability that you have to expect in your forecast into account when you're making your decisions.
Yes, and just one example maybe for the audience would be, for example, you were mentioning airlines. If you want to play the game of overbooking, it's fine. There is always a few passengers that don't show up, so you can sell a few more tickets than seats that you have in the aircraft. But the problem is that at some point you're really short of seats. So at some point you're facing you had only 200 seats. You sold 220, thinking that there will be 20 people that don't show up, and no, you actually have 205 people that don't show up. So you have like 5 people that, no matter how you do it, they won't fit in the aircraft, and that's, they won't fit. It's not a matter of extra. Yes, you can give them a compensation and play all sorts of games, but at the end of the day, you have 5 people that will have a terrible quality of service for the flight that they purchase from you. So it's a very, very non-linear things where the first few seats, yes, you can pretty much overbook the aircraft, but then there is a limit, and the limit comes like it's brutal, especially for those people if they had something really important to attend to. It is absolutely not like a gently linear problem where it's just a little bit more of the same. No, there is like a cutoff, and then it becomes like a real problem real fast.
Well, listening to follow up and kind of stitch together a couple of thoughts, because you both said really interesting things that lead to the next point. But Joannes, your example there of overbooking, and Meinolf, earlier your example of if you're measuring demand, basically it was a comment about demand, like I don't know, you sold, oh look, I sold 20 units of skin cream last month. Well, you did, but you had a stock out, so you don't actually know what demand would have been. That then leads, so again, you can think rationally about the problem. My understanding, and I think I speak for both of us, Joannes and me here, is having watched your lectures, and I strongly recommend people watch them online, they're freely available on YouTube, is that when you think rationally about the problem, it naturally leads you to stochastic optimization, to embracing that uncertainty, even though, so there's no perfect answer. And I think you have a phrase, something like, and I'm going to butcher it now, but it's the, a good solution now is better than the perfect one too late, or something to that effect.
Yes, I mean, that's a different point also, when kind of the time you need to find a good answer kind of plays into the quality of the answer itself. So yes, I mean, you definitely need that. But to your point, so why does the variability matter? I mean, maybe we explain that best with an example, right?
Please.
Say you're running a supermarket in I don't know, 9th arrondissement in Paris, and you have a beautiful shop there, and okay, you have different products that you put on the shelves. There's butter, and right now there's probably these sunscreen kits, right? So like 3 big tubes with a sun protection factor of 20, and then 2 smaller ones with 50. So kind of for the whole summer, for the family, you'll be all set if you buy that. 2 very, very different products. Now, if you have a forecast there that you in the next four weeks or so, you're going to sell 300 of those kits. So next 30 days, 300 kits. Should you go and say, oh, it's 10 per day? No, with the butter you can do that, right? Because butter is a constant demand, and it's basically your forecast is around its average all the time, and it deviates a little bit left and right. With the sunscreen, it's more like, okay, look, right now weather is bad, and then comes this one weekend where the sun is out and everybody prepares and buys the sunscreen basically for the whole summer. If you don't have the whole supply available in the supermarket at that time, you just missed it. It's not like, because you only had like 10 sunscreens lying around there, or 10 of those kits lying around there today, you're going to make up for the other 290s tomorrow. No, starting Monday, you're not going to sell any of those anymore. And that is that is kind of the difference, right? So the expected value can be the same, but it matters a lot on whether the variability is kind of closely distributed around that expected value, or whether there is basically a huge discrepancy where you would say, well, it's either nothing or this big value. And if you don't take that into account when making your decisions, you're just missing it, right? And you're leaving a lot of money on the table if you treat products, for example, that way. I hope that kind of exemplifies what we're talking about here, right? Expected values are expected values. But what you need to know is what scenarios do you actually need to look at. And that is what stochastic optimization does. It looks at different potential futures and tries to find a compromise decision today. So for the things you need to decide today, where you can't wait to see what does the future look like, for those decisions, it tries to find a good starting position so that you can then act very well once the future is revealed. That is what stochastic optimization is, and that is, I mean, in my mind, is what every human does every day. Just that we forget to do that as soon as we're using a computer for these tasks, apparently.
Well, thank you. And Joannes, again, how does that align with your understanding of stochastic optimization?
Yeah, I mean, that's the case of having, that Meinolf was mentioning, of having a pattern, so the sunscreen that is very seasonal, but the start of the season, I mean, varies with the weather from one year to the next is very, very classic. I mean, there are tons of products that falls into this category. Another sort of products that is also where I'm taking, I would say, a similar retail example would be the DIY store, where people would, it's very different to say I have a product that is sold one per week on average, except with that when you look at the patterns, people would buy like 4 units or 8 units at once because they're like light switches, and they don't want to have like 4 or 8 light switches in their apartment that just look all different. So when they buy, they will want to have like 4 or 8 all the same at the same point of time. And if you think that having 3 on the shelf is like you're not having a stock out, this is wrong. Because actually the person enters the store, say, I want 4, there is only 3, say, too bad. And they go somewhere else where they can find 4 units that happens to be the same. So the lumpiness of the demand really matter. And that's the sort of things where suddenly we need to look at the fine structure of the erraticity matters more than something that is average out over a long period of time. And that's and indeed that would be what instinctively the person running the store would know. I say, oh yes, those light switches, having one is useless. I don't need that. I need to have either a box of them all the same, or it's better not to have them in the first place because people would just not even bother having a look at like a standalone. A standalone hammer is okay because people don't come and buy like 4 identical hammers. But a standard hammer is okay, but light switches is not. And that's something that is, very, I mean, it's not like rocket science mathematics when you think of it. And I think you're completely correct. I've witnessed the same thing. I would say people know that, especially supply chain practitioners, they would know that in their guts. They don't need, the math. But as soon as they enter the realm of enterprise software, suddenly moving average and a little bit of exponential smoothing is supposed to, cover the case. And they say, don't worry. If moving average is not enough, we have ABC classes on top to refine the thing. And now I'm thinking, that's you have ABC, great. That's still not helping, but great. And I agree. There is this disconnect where supposedly, I mean, when we go into this realm of software, people, I mean, leave their common sense at the door, thinking, it's a machine, it's too complicated. So, I mean, obviously, if they are doing exponential smoothing, there is exponential in the term. It has to be, scientific and advanced.
Right. We like to decompose problems, right? And that's why I like the term lumpiness that you mentioned. It's so delightfully not determinist technicus that you can use it. But it goes even cross-product, right? I mean, if you run a supermarket and you increase your milk prices, all of a sudden fewer people come to your store because they don't get their staples there anymore. And suddenly the kayaks or whatever else you're selling there seasonally are also not being sold anymore because you just have much less traffic in the store. So really what you need is kind of like some joint posterior distribution where you're forecasting, hey, these could be potential scenarios on how everything flows.
It honestly sounds, again, that description there specifically about the staples and then the interrelationship, that sounds remarkably similar to the basket perspective that we talk about. Again, you go in, you might want to buy, I don't know, a hammer. Well, they don't have a hammer I leave. I go in. I want to buy many things. I want to do a full laundry list, a full shopping list. Milk is missing. Okay, I'm going to go somewhere else where I can get milk as well as everything else. Thus, the penalty for not having the milk is not isolated to the lost sale of the milk. It's everything, because having the milk would have meant I would have sold the butter and the bread and the jam and the ice cream and the bacon, whatever. But again, and now this kind of comes into the next question, which is to defend with the principle of charity anyone who might not agree. People like heuristics. When you were talking about like decomposing problems, people like heuristics. So the idea of like an ABC class, exponential smoothing, these are things that are easier to understand, rules of thumb. Stochastic optimization is more complex than that, to be fair. No?
Well, I mean, I guess what's fair to say is that we didn't used to have the tools in order to tackle it neatly for a department. So while keeping those separation of concerns between machine learning and optimization, right? You don't want to have to retrain everybody on your team in order to do this stuff. And so I guess it would have been fair up until, I don't know, since 5 years ago, maybe. But with today's technology, no, I wouldn't necessarily say it is more complex for the people who have to stand up those solutions anymore.
Well, then the follow-up, and again, I will come to Joannes specifically on this question, but then, again, earlier talking about accuracy. How does accuracy, what is traditionally considered the absolute benchmark KPI for any forecasting, how does accuracy figure into stochastic optimization, or is that just another heuristic that sort of falls by the wayside when you shift to thinking about decisions?
Yeah, yes. So, I mean, obviously, if somebody could tell you what the lottery numbers next Saturday were going to be, that would be awesome. The problem is you have to make forecasts, and they come with inherent uncertainty. You don't know everything about the world in order to know what's going to happen. So if you're a store, and I don't know, you have to decide what kind of sushi dishes you're going to put in there, right? Perishable goods, kind of everything applies that Joannes was mentioning before about, overselling seats on an airline. If you're not selling the sushi, you have to throw it away. And that means that the whole cost of producing, transporting, and pricing and putting it there is just lost if you're not selling it. So you don't want to overstock those relatively low margin compared to the cost that you're losing when it's perishable. Do you know whether there are these 5 young mothers who decided, great, we can eat sushi again and going to have a party and are raiding your store? You don't. You just don't know that they would show up and buy 40 of those sushi dishes all of a sudden. And you cannot possibly know these things. So there is uncertainty there. If you had a perfect forecast, it would be awesome. But now seeing that you cannot have it, you now do the next best thing. And that is you're trying to learn, how do my forecasts err? And this is what we call with the posterior distribution. So we're saying, okay, look, does this mean if I put these sushi dishes in there, does this mean for my expected value that I'm having here, say 50 dishes or so? Most of the days it's 50 dishes, sometimes it's 48, sometimes it's 42, good. Or does 50 dishes mean, well, yeah, it's either 25 or 75. Big difference. The accuracy is the same. The expected value is 50, right? But the scenarios you need to look at and the decisions you need to derive from there in terms of what you're going to put on your shelf is very, very different. So it's a bit misleading, right? I mean, accuracy would be awesome if you could get 100%. If you cannot get 100%, you need to do the next best thing, and that is you need to forecast and assess how you are erring.
Yes, and just to jump back on the comment of Meinolf on the complexity or the perceived complexity, my take on that is that very frequently when approaching a situation, the instinct is to start with the solution. It's very, very difficult to conceive a problem until you have the solution. But it's very strange. Again, I would say the Cartesian thinking would be, let's consider this problem and investigate the solution. But that's absolutely not like people, even myself, operate. It's more like I have this array of solutions that I can imagine, and from that I can reconstruct a problem that I can solve. You know, it's typically the other way around. So you start with a solution or the array of solutions you're willing to entertain, and then based on that you will pick the problem that you think that you can solve, because there are plenty of problems that would be fantastic, but you just can't solve them. You know, having flying cars, I don't know how to make an anti-gravity engine, so I don't even spend time considering what would be the best design for a flying car, because I'm so remotely away from being able to do that it's not even a problem that is worth my time. So back to that, I think, you know, when we go to uncertainty in the forecast and then crunching this uncertainty on the optimization side, that's stochastic optimization, I think the element, and I'm with you with the sort of progress of technology. The element is it is the sort of stuff that requires, you know, technological ingredients, conceptual, you know, concepts, paradigms, a few things. They are not necessarily super hard, but if you are intellectually living with those things that are completely absent, it's very hard to imagine them out of nothing. You know, it's just like fundamentally they are not very, very difficult, but again they are very strange. And again, I mean, people nowadays take it for granted that they can, you know, have a call with someone that is on the other side of the world, and it's a given. Tell that to a person 200 years ago, and they would think it's complete magic. You know, that's the idea that you could do such thing was just inconceivable. So can people do it nowadays? Yeah, quite easily. But again, they know the solution, so thinking about the problem is much easier. So back to that, I believe that the challenge is that until you have kind of the solution, it's very, very hard to reason about that. And if we to segue maybe into the sort of products that you're doing at InsideOpt with Seeker, is that if all you have are, let's say, optimization tools that do not deal with any kind of uncertainty, then all the optimization problems that you're willing to consider are by design, due to your tool, the one where you have kind of eliminated in a paradigmatic manner the uncertainty. You know, it's literally, this is my silver bullet, so I need a problem again that fit, and this is it. So that's where I see that's the biggest challenge is sometimes just creating the awareness of the existence of the class of solutions, so that people can even think the class of problems. I know I'm very meta here.
No. Well, actually, to follow up, because it's actually a perfect segue, perhaps unintentionally, but I'll give you credit nonetheless. Because when you talk about Cartesian first principles, again, starting with the problem and then going to the solution, in one of your lectures, Meinolf, you talk about the coffee roaster problem. And could you sketch that out, please? Because again, it's a very vivid, very, very pleasant example. And then define what the problem is, and then explain how stochastically we might solve that, or using stochastic optimization, we might solve that problem.
It's actually a very classical problem in optimization. It's called production planning. Mm-hmm. And it's probably, if you've ever taken a course on the kind of the standard workhorse that Joannes was just referring to, right, which is the silver bullet for everything in optimization, which is mixed integer programming. You ever took a course on that? Probably in course number 2, they gave you an example of production planning. So what's production planning? You have limited resources in order to build the products that you want to make. And you have an expected profit, say, that comes with making each unit of each product. But they share these production capabilities. So what are those? Machines that can do multiple different products. They share different, the packaging street, for example. They share the roasters in case of the coffee. Sometimes they share the ingredients, so different kind of coffees might use the same kind of beans. Mm-hmm. It's usually a mixture of beans that goes in there, right? So, but they're sharing them. So another question becomes, okay, so what am I going to produce on what production capability am I going to use to build what product at what time? Mm-hmm. That's the task, right? So And this is something that needs to be done every day in order to produce coffee. There needs to be somebody there who says, okay, let's roast these raw beans over here. Let's store them in that silo over there because you can't use them right away. They need to cool down before you package them. And then you go and you then take them out again. You also need to decide when you're going to take out what from which silo. And then you move it to the packaging streets, which have limited capabilities also. So far, so good. If you now knew exactly how long it takes to roast the coffee, life would be much easier. Also, if you knew exactly how long it takes for the beans to cool down, life would also be much easier. The problem is you have estimates for both. Mm-hmm. So depending on how dry the beans are that are coming into the roasting factory, the roast is less long or longer in order to get the beans to perfection. And that of course screws up everything because you cannot just, I mean, you might say, hey, if it's faster, then so what, right? It's you just leave the roaster alone, but you cannot do that because if you're leaving a roaster alone, not roasting anything for longer than 10 minutes or so, you have to shut it off. And if you shut it off, then it takes half an hour to get it back operational. Mm-hmm. So you suddenly get these. So this is what Joannes was referring to with these non-linearities that you're all of a sudden facing, where you go like, yeah, well, okay, so now the roaster just switched itself off, and now good luck trying to roast the next half hour. Now you might say, well, what harm does it do if I start roasting the next thing earlier? Well, you don't know where to put that stuff because the silos are full, and the packaging doesn't follow, right? So it's like in order to get room for the next product that you would come out of the roaster, you need to free that up, that capability. But that means creating stress on another part of the system. Yeah, and now you sit there and you need to come up with a plan. I mean, your roasters typically find that their roasters are actually standing still for some duration of time, plain and simple because they do not know where to store the product. The finished but unpackaged product, and that of course is an enormous strain on the operational costs of such a business.
No, I think it reflects the fact that beware of, I would say, simplistic modelization. There is a degree of details in the business that is very high, and also that calls for another thing is that most I would say models published in the literature and most of what you get in courses, they give you usually a direct, more or less sophisticated solution to, I would say, a nicely behaved problem. So you have like a problem that has like a nice structure, something that, because teachers, I've been teaching at university, you don't want to spend 2 hours just writing all the variables. So you will present the problem so that it has like 10 variables top, and so that you don't spend 2 hours presenting all the factors of the problem. So you want something that can be max 10 variables, max 3 equations, and be done with it and move on. Which is misleading because the reality is that reality comes with a lot of details. And thus, what does that leave you? It leaves you that being handed over a solution, a model, is kind of useless. It is not sufficient. It's not sufficient because, well, you never know exactly your situation. You will try to model it, then you will discover something, and then you will revise your modelization. And maybe you will say, okay, this thing is just too complicated to modelize, I give up, but I need to reintroduce this other variable that I had ignored because in fact it's not, it was a mistake to ignore it. It does really impact my operation. And so the model itself, again, that's, if we look at the typical perspective of academia, is the model is a given, there will be a proof, there will be like a canonical forms and whatnot, and that's exactly what you will get with mixed integer programming, where they have like a series of problems that can be solved readily with canonical forms and whatnot. But the reality is that when you're dealing with an actual supply chain, you have an ever-changing problem. And you learn from applying the tool, whatever you have, to the problem. And you revise. And suddenly you realize that what matters is more like you need something that is, again, more, a bit more abstract, something that lets you, I would say, swiftly, efficiently, switch from one instance of the problem to the next instance of the problem and keep doing that, which means all sorts of things. It needs to be, computationally, it needs to be fast. It needs to be versatile so that you can, very expressive, so that you can express all sorts of diverse solutions. It should be quite convenient to plug into the rest of your applicative landscape. So it comes with a lot of extra concerns that are, again, if you look at typical mathematical optimization literature, those concerns that I just mentioned are not even listed. You can go from page 1 to the last page of the book, and at no point they would discuss, well, by the way, this method is like super slow, impractical, or this approach is so rigid that whatever, at the smallest, revision of the model, you would have to throw it away entirely and restart, or this approach is so error-prone that yes, in theory, you could do it that way if you're like the NASA and that you have like super bright engineers and a decade to approach the problem. But in practice, if you're in a hurry and whatnot, it will never fly, etc., etc., etc. So there is plenty of meta concerns that are very, very important. And again, I believe that it could, relate to the sort of things that you're doing, and caught my interest with sort of technology with seekers and how you even thinking this class of problems.
Yes. And I mean, if you look at the, kind of back to what you were saying before, that we're always looking for a silver bullet here, right? So you're absolutely correct, Joannes, that when people model the business, and that's probably what the audience is interested here is to say, hey, how do we get better results, more tangible for the business? You are to some extent forced to make an approximation of real life in the computer and kind of simulate that out, right? I mean, in one way or another, you can think of any optimization model as a simulation of, hey, what would happen if I do this? And then you kind of compute what would happen, right? Is that still something, is that the plan I can still execute, which we would call feasible in the terminology of optimization? So does it obey all the side constraints? Is this executable? But then secondly, also, how good is it actually, right? Which the objective function, so this is how we measure the KPI that we're trying to optimize, is called, so that would be better. But the point now is, if you run around and the only tool you know is a hammer, you will find yourself putting nails on top of your windows to hang your curtains at some point. And it's a very, very bad idea. And this is kind of what the MIP folks are doing when they're dealing with things like supply chain and optimization and uncertainty in general, because they're using a tool that is made for deterministic optimization. And for that, it is absolutely fabulous, but it forces you to make approximations, both on the side of determinism versus non-determinism, or uncertainty, I should say, because non-determinism has another meaning in that context. But then also in terms of linearizing everything. There's so many relationships in the business that are just not linear. And then the question is, okay, so can you somehow approximate that, right? Can you fit some piecewise linear function to your nonlinear function? Can you binarize things, right? Stuff like this, is that what then is going on? And now to kind of make that more tangible to the audience, if you are running a business, say you're the COO of a company, sure, I mean, you can just, you can go to Lokad and say, hey, we're going to buy it from you, and they will take care of you. But say you have another company that does this for you, or you have your own department that does it. What should you do in order to get better operations? So you might now be intrigued and go like, oh, there's this whole other thing, and 20% better operational costs sounded awesome. How do I get that? The first thing you need to do is you need to ask, what is our process? Is this a predict and optimize process? But then secondly, also, what liberties did we take in modeling the real system that we're actually dealing with? Where are we approximating? And so what you should follow for both, actually, in order to see what the discrepancy is to say, okay, look, your optimization model had an objective function. It said, I'm favoring this solution over this other solution because my objective function, which is supposed to approximate the real KPI, is better for this solution versus that other. Now tell me, for the optimal solution, what is my expected KPI? And then track that. Track that and compare it to your actual in your system solutions and results that you're actually getting. So if you're minimizing costs, track costs and look at the difference between what the MIP thought what the costs were going to be and what your real costs actually are. Or, you know, if you're maximizing profit, well, you track that one. But the point here is this: track it. Look at the difference between what was used in order to make the decision versus what then actually materializes. And there are two sources for any discrepancy. The first one is that you were forced to fit your system into a modeling framework that was too restrictive. That's a bad thing. Or the other one is you just completely ignore that there's uncertainty, and that's where the discrepancy is coming from. If you see more than a 5% discrepancy over there, you need to talk to one of us.
And I would add to your recipe, and I agree on your thought process that you just outlined. I would even add something that I typically recommend even prior to this process. So something that at the very, very start is because there was like the problem with the wrong tools, but I would say even before that, there is even the problem of having the wrong concepts, the wrong, very ideas. Just to give you an example, for example, the notion of feasibility that is found, in the classical optimization literature. People would say, oh, there is a solution that is feasible or unfeasible. Okay, let's have a concrete example. Is it something that is really black and white like that? Just to give an example. We are in a warehouse and we pass orders to suppliers, routinely. And the warehouse has a finite capacity for receptions. So on any given day, let's say it can take in a max of 1,000 units. Let's say, beyond that, you can't, and there is stuff that just accumulate on front of the warehouse just because people cannot just bring the boxes in and whatnot. Okay. The problem is, let's say you are passing purchase orders, overseas suppliers. You don't exactly control the delivery dates. You know that if you arrange things, on average, you should, stick to your constraints, but still, you may be unlucky, and then, there was like an order that is postponed, another that came a little bit faster, and then bam, you end up with one Monday where you end up with 2,000 units that comes in the same day, but those orders were purchased like months in advance. So here, you see, this is a solution where there is, for every decision that you take, there is a probability that you will end up in an unfeasible situation. It's not entirely on your control. So it's, again, that's the sort of things where I say wrong concepts is that where it's very dangerous is that when you analyze, the situation with kind of, I would say, outdated concepts or too rigid or inappropriate, the problem is that you cannot even get into the intellectual mood that lets you appreciate what the better tool will actually bring. You're so stuck with I would say, feasible, not feasible. Well, once you understand that actually feasibility is not entirely up to you, obviously there are stuff that will collide. So if you order, suppliers from the same area, the same day, same quantity with same ports and whatnot, the probability that everything lands to your door the exact same day are pretty high. So you would spread out, but even there you have like sort of risk. And this happens, in many, many settings. And thus, that's an example. So here we see that what is taken for granted, feasibility, a feasible solution, infeasible solution, it's not exactly that way. This is you see, the concept is a little bit off. Another way would be service level. People would think in terms of service level. Yes, but is it really what people perceive? That's typically I engage with the discussion of quality of service. And quality of service may include the possibility of substitute, cannibalization, or even the willingness for people to postpone. And suddenly we end up with something that is very different. And if you go straight to the problem with the concepts that you had from this world where uncertainty doesn't exist, where your optimizer is always, classic, so non-stochastic, then my take is that you most likely the sort of path that you propose will feel incomprehensible. So that's why typically I encourage my own prospects to just pause and really do a briefing exercise and start, looking at the world through different lenses, and just take the time to consider those things with this sort of gut feeling, before jumping into the technicalities that can be very distracting because they are a little bit technical, plus it's software, plus it's a little bit of math, plus it's et cetera, et cetera. And that can be a huge distraction, especially if you have like competing vendors who are throwing tons of nonsense into the mix, like, oh, you want to do all of that? You know what? I have the answer for you. LLMs. And you know what? You had this uncertainty, but we have LLMs, large language models. It's going to, those forecasts, you will not believe how good they will be, and the optimization with LLMs, it's so good. Obviously, when people are thinking, okay, I'm just, because at least at Lokad, when we're talking to prospect, the point is that we are never talking alone to the prospect. There is like half a dozen of other vendors who are also pitching their stuff, and frequently they are pitching a lot of nonsense. And so the prospects are just overwhelmed with all those shiny things and those outlandish claims also.
Well, it occurs to me that you both basically just sketched out one of the key problems with getting people on side with stochastic optimization and any other sort of black boxed technology. Could be probabilistic forecasting or anything involving maths, basically, is that there is a bar to entry to a degree. And so, Meinolf, to come back to you, in your experience, how do you try, because you're very good at teaching, how exactly do you make people comfortable embracing the kind of uncertainty that we've talked about for an hour?
There might be a cognitive disconnect right now with the audience where they go like, okay, so you told us that the airlines are losing their shit on the day of operation, but for some reason, and they have been adopters of this technology for decades. Why on earth aren't they using the stuff that, Lokad and InsideOpt are talking about? And well, the reason is exactly what you're alluding to. Up until, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, if you wanted to do stochastic optimization for something like an airline, you would be increasing the size of the problem to a point where you're just not able to solve it anymore. And so the folks who are working in the airline industry and are doing optimization for it are very, very savvy, and they know, of course, about stochastic optimization and the traditional one, but it was always based on MIP. So I don't want to get too technical here, but essentially, when you're looking for something, there's two ways how you can look. One of them is to say, oh, I found something that's already good. Let's see if I can make this better. And the other way is to say, I'm never gonna find something over here. MIP works by saying, oh, I don't have to look over here, cannot be here, and then look someplace else. Now, if your search space is vast, if this whole thing that tells you don't have to look here doesn't work very well, so it's kind of because like, yeah, it doesn't look like it, but I can't rule it out either. Then you keep looking everywhere, and it becomes much more effective to go and look where it's already looking pleasing. Let's put it that way, right? And so if you're trying to do stochastic optimization with mixed interprogramming, which works kind of in this way where you're saying, oh, I know there can't be anything there, you're so-called dual bounds will never be good enough in order to cut the search space to a point where you can actually afford to do the search. And that's where people have been stuck for 20, 25 years. And now there's this new way of doing things, which is essentially AI-based search, which says, look, I could care less on whether I'm going to get some kind of quality bound for the solution I'm going to get, but instead, I assure you, I'm going to spend all of my time trying to find the best solution I possibly can in the time that I have to do the job. It's very, very pragmatic and practical. And that now exists. And in that framework, you suddenly liberate yourself also of all the other shackles that you had to deal with beforehand, such as that you have to linearize and binarize everything. Right? All of those things are gone. You can do non-differentiable, non-convex optimization with a tool like InsideOpt Seeker. And modeling these problems is actually not so much a problem anymore. There's a couple other benefits you're actually getting from it, which is parallelizing mixed integer programming. So this branch and bound approach is very, very difficult to do. The speed ups you're getting are limited. I mean, you're lucky if you get a 5 times speed up on a reasonably large machine. This AI-based search really benefits from throwing 40, 100 cores at a problem. And so it kind of goes with the development of hardware as well, that this might actually be the better technology to use. But the bottom line is you're by using a different way of searching these vast spaces, you're enabling the users much more comfortably to model the real system as opposed to some crude approximation thereof, and at the same time handle things like multi-objective optimization. There's rarely only one KPI that matters. There's multiple. Handle things like, look, I mostly want this rule to be obeyed over here, but it's okay if every now and then it's disobeyed, right? So it's okay if there's a scenario where that feasibility doesn't hold. You can model that very easily. And of course, you can do stochastic optimization, not just in the sense that you're optimizing expected returns, but you can even actively optimize, constrain, minimize the risk that you're running that comes with your solutions. And that is the paradigm shift. This is kind of what I think drives Lokad and InsideOpt, is to say, hey, look, there is a completely new paradigm that we can follow, which allows us to do all of these things, which were just unheard of for the past 3 decades.
Joannes, same question. Thank you. Meinolf.
Yes, and I would like also to point out, I mean, it's in the early 2000s when I started my PhD, I never finished. You know, the interesting thing is that the belief of, let's say, the machine learning community and the optimization community about, I would say, the fundamental problems of optimization turned out to be completely wrong. You see, when I was in PhD, the belief was the curse of dimensionality. If you have like a super high dimensional problems, you can't optimize. You know, there is, I mean, and now we are, again, with deep learning models, we are dealing with models that have like billions or even, you know, trillions of parameters. So apparently, yes, we can optimize problems, no problem. Then they were thinking of, if it's not convex, you can't do anything. Turn out that no, you can actually do a lot of things even if it's not convex. And indeed, we have no proof whatsoever. But if you have something that is, I would say, according to other criterions, quite good and useful, it doesn't really matter that you can't prove that it's the optimal, as long as you have other ways to reason about the solution. And that you would say, well, I can't reason about the optimality, but I can still reason about the fact that it's an excellent solution, even if I don't have the mathematical proof. And there was like all those series of things where also the idea of you see, for a long time, the only way that when I was looking at the stochastic optimization, people would say, that was what you were mentioning about augmenting the dimension. Say, okay, so you're going to spell out 1,000 scenarios and write those 1,000 scenarios as just one situation that you want to optimize at once. You see, it's just macro expansion. You just take, you have your problem, you just macro expand this problem into 1,000 instances, and that gives you a problem that is 1,000 times larger. And then you say, okay, now I am back to square one. I can actually just optimize that. But by doing that, you're just you already had with, let's say, the old branch and bound paradigms, you already had terrible scalability. So if your step one is to macro expand your problem by a factor of 1,000, it's going to be absolutely dramatically slow. So and what surprised, I believe, for example, the deep learning community so much was the incredible efficiency of the stochastic gradient descent, where you can just observe situations and just nudge the parameters in a little bit every time you observe something, and it works. And there are plenty. So there was like plenty of insights. And the interesting thing is that I've seen during the last 2 decades is that machine learning and optimization have been, progressing side by side, mostly by destroying prior belief. That was a very, very interesting process. I mean, most of the deep learning breakthrough came through better optimization tools, better using linear algebra and GPUs, special kind of computer hardwares. And mathematical optimization more and more is using things from machine learning techniques where you don't want to search randomly. There are places where you say, well, these things here, I can't prove anything, but it looks like super bad. So, and it looks like plain bad. This whole neighborhood is like super crap. So I need to have a look elsewhere. And also other considerations such as I've already spent a lot of time in this area searching. So maybe even if it's like a good area, generally speaking, I've spent already so much time there, then maybe I should be looking somewhere else. And this is the sort of thing that is, so that's a sort of optimization technique, but that is very much, I would say, machine learning oriented in the sort of thinking. And so my take is that maybe 20 years from now, there might even be, one domain that has merged that is like machine learning optimization, and you don't really differentiate the two. It is one of the things that I had on my radar for 2 decades, and every year that passes, I see this gradual convergence, and it's very intriguing because I feel that there is concepts that are missing yet still.
Yes, and I mean, I'll hone into one thing that you said over there. Machine learning is awesome when you have repeated games. It's like counting cards in blackjack, right? So you can't guarantee that you're going to win. There's still a chance that the forecast will be off. But if you play that game repeatedly, you suddenly have a big edge. Right, and that is kind of why I said before, look, trace your operational results, your profit, your cost, or whatever you're doing for some period of time, because on any one day the solution that you ran can be off. Right, it's a little bit like somebody saying, "Oh, I'm going to roll this die, and if it shows a 4, then you lose, and you have to pay me $1 to play." But if it's anything but a 4, I'm gonna give you $1 million. And then you give them the $1 and you roll the die and it's a 4. It was the right decision to do that, right? Because if you play that game repeatedly with that strategy of accepting that game, because the expected value is of course so high and the loss in any way is very doable, you suddenly gain a real advantage. And that is kind of the name of the game when you use machine learning in optimization. And this is exactly this paradigm of AI-based search. We call it hyperreactive search. I don't know how you guys call it internally at Lokad, but it's exactly this idea, right? Can for your problems, so this is kind of what drives InsideOpt Seeker. This is what the solver will do for you. Once you know what your model is and what problems you're solving, and what now every day you have these operational problems, you need to decide what am I going to roast where today, right? How much inventory am I going to relocate today and to where, right? And you have those instances that you need to do over the course of many different weeks and production days. You then go and you ask the solver, hey, look at your strategies on how you're actually searching this space. Could you have found better solutions if you had searched differently? And then it will look exactly at runtime features like the one that you mentioned, Joannes, how long has it been since I've been looking someplace else, right? So it seems like I've thoroughly searched this whole idea over here. Let's see if I can do something else. And others like it. Right, and those runtime features then influence other decisions, such as how many things am I willing to alter at the same time? Right? Should I actually do an investigation? So if it's only very recent that I came to some search space, it might be a very, very good idea to be very greedy, to kind of say, hey, any improving move I'm just going to take right now in order to find a good solution in that space. But then after a while, you've been in there for a while, then you go like, well, I need to broaden my horizon a little bit here because I might actually be stuck in something that's only locally optimal. But globally, I could have set other variables much better so that overall I could have done something better over here. And that's kind of the paradigm shift right now, right? So it goes away from this whole thinking of, can you quickly detect there's nothing here, to can I learn how to search better? And that's the revolution.
To jump on the AI search, yes, absolutely. And especially with the sort of problems that Lokad is solving for our clients, most supply chains can be extensively approached greedily. Not all the way through, but extensively. And there was some kind of Darwinistic reasons for that. Is that if you had, supply chain situations where that were really, I would say, antithetical, to greedy approach, they have been purged, eliminated already. Because businesses didn't have the luxury of having super fancy optimization tools. So they needed, and very frequently that was literally a design consideration, which is, can I set up my supply chain and my processes so that I can directionally move in the right direction, and still be okay. So that was, typically guiding principle at the design level. And then indeed, when you get into the fine print, you realize that, you can be stuck in some bad places, even if directionally you're still good. So typically, yes, Lokad would rely extensively on I would say, the greedy perspective, even going all the way through with gradients when you have it. And then indeed do like the local, once you're into the I would say the final phase where you want to do the micro adjustments and maybe get a little bit more resilient so if you can do some adjustment that don't cost you much but can give you a lot more leeway in operations, that would be just to make it more concrete for the audience. Let's say, for example, you operate a warehouse. You think that there is like a 0.1% chance that you're out of packaging cardboard, to ship your stuff. It may seem, it's 0.1% is like a low probability event. But on the other hand, it feels like very dumb once in a 3 year to shut down the warehouse just because you're short on cardboard that are super cheap. So you would say, okay, it's so little that let's have a couple of months of extra cardboards. Because they are folded, they takes like no space at all. They are super cheap. So that's so that's the sort of things where a little bit of extra optimization would say, people would say, oh, we have like let's say a 3 days lead time for those cardboards. We already have like a month in stock. And people would say, oh, it's enough. We don't. And then you do the simulation and say, you know what? You still have this 0.1% risk. It's pretty dumb. You should have like 3 months. And people would say, okay, it's very cheap, but it feels like really a lot. But I say, well, it's super cheap. It doesn't take that much space. And why risk it? That's the sort of things that are slightly counterintuitive, where you would realize that it's this thing is just once in a 3 year. But then you have like a lot of things that happens once in a 3 year. And that's where having a nice optimization that will let you cover those things that are so infrequent that for the human mind, it feels like it was another life. I mean, people rotate, they rarely stay 2 decades on the same job. So probably something that happens once in 3 years, the manager of the warehouse has never seen it. The teams, most of the people don't even remember seeing the thing. So there is limit to what you can perceive when it's like below the perception threshold because it's too infrequent. And yet,
It's the extreme.
there is so many different things that when you put them together, you realize that no, I mean, it's 0.1% plus another thing that is at 0.1 plus another thing. And you add like dozens and dozens and dozens. And at the end of the day, you end up with something where it's like every month there is one of those problems that could have been prevented if you were really taking into account the risk. But it's a little bit counterintuitive because it's a little bit more spending in all sorts of places where, why the extra? Well, the extra is because, well, infrequently, but almost certainly, you run into trouble if you don't.
Yes. And I think that is actually the trap that you're falling into when you actually have a provable optimal solution. Because it sounds like, okay, so look, this is my provably optimal solution, and I have good forecasts, but now if the forecasts are slightly off that provable optimal solution because it squeezed the last penny out of the solution, it's extremely brittle, and right and left of that forecast, the performance goes down and is abysmal. And you want technology that allows you to say, look, yes, your expected profit is 80 cents less, but now your risk of having to close down the warehouse is reduced by 75%. Good deal, right? It's a good deal to make. And these are exactly the kind of trade-offs that you want the technology for you to find, because it's very, very difficult for you to say, okay, look, let me constrain one and optimize the other, because then you run into another trade-off trap. You want to be able to say, look, I have all of these concerns. Try and find a good compromise. Find me the cheapest insurance against an event such and such. And that is kind of, maybe on kind of closes the loop with how we started on how hard it can be to kind of wrap your head around the decision making and uncertainty. But this is in essence what it is. The misconception is that if you had a solution that is optimal for one predicted future, that it will probably also work reasonably well for futures that are just slight derivations thereof. And that is just not true. You need to actively look for a great compromise operational plan that works against a big probability mass of futures that can actually hit. And you want it in such a way that it actually trades off your risk and your expected returns in a reasonable fashion.
Basically, just to dip in there as a summary and then correct me where I'm wrong, but the ultimate goal then of stochastic optimization would be to find, I guess, the optimal trade-off or the optimal decision that balances all the constraints and all the trade-offs that you have to make. And that's not the perfect decision, but it will be the best compromise to satisfy all the decisions or all the separate problems.
Yes, correct. So
I have been listening.
I mean, we could do that mathematically, but it's I don't want to lead people down that path. But the point is this: had you known exactly what was going to happen, there most often is a better solution that you could have run. But in absence of knowing the future perfectly, and I mean perfectly, not just 99.9% perfectly, in absence of that, you need to run a compromise that is essentially that is good across the board for all the different things that could happen. And that is exactly what stochastic optimization does for you. And thereby it removes fragility. We might say it's robust optimization, but that's its own terminus technica, so we can't actually use that. But that's what's meant, right? You want to remove brittleness. You want to remove fragility in your operations, have very reliable, continued, repeated results. That is what stochastic optimization will give you. And at the same time, your expected profits will actually rise beyond of what you thought was possible. Because if you just go by cross-validation performance and then provable optimality, you're completely missing the point. There is what you think is the cost of not knowing the future perfectly is the cost of assuming in the optimization is the cost of assuming you knew the future perfectly. This is what makes it brittle, is that you're assuming that forecast was correct 100%. And this is how traditional optimization technology functions, and you need to jettison it and start working with modern technology in order to harvest those 20% in operation costs that you can reduce your operations with.
Well, thank you. I think we're kind of winding down. Joannes, I'll give you a last comment and then throw it over to Meinolf to close. Anything you want to add there?
I mean, yeah, the intriguing thing is that you see the best supply chain, what it looks like. That's and the best, sort of risk-adjusted decisions are the one where the company keeps humming gently. Where there is no, I would say, absolutely critical, disastrous decision that gets made that just blow everything up, and that's where people would expect like the most brilliant supply chain plan ever would be to identify this one product that has been completely ignored by the market and say, you know what, we have to go all in on this one product that was like super niche and bam, sell 1 million units while nobody was even paying attention. And say, this is magic. No, I mean, maybe there is like Steve Jobs sort of entrepreneurs that can do that, but it's just almost impossible. So the idea that you can, see the future, identify the golden nugget, the Bitcoin-like opportunity, and go all in on that and make a fortune. I would say it's very ludicrous. What it looks like, I would say, excellent management of supply chain is that it's humming gently. You have risk-aware decisions so that when it's bad, it's actually very moderately bad. When it's good, it's most of the time it's very good, so it's very solidly profitable. When it's bad, it's kind of limited and it's not horrible. And when you revisit a decision, you go back in time and you look at it. Yes, if I had known, I would have done differently. But if I do the honest exercise to try to get back into the sort of things that I knew at the time, you'd say, yeah, it was kind of a reasonable take at the time, and not confuse, not let the hindsight pollute your judgment about that, because it's very bad. And I knew, for example, some of our clients, they don't do that anymore, but aerospace, they would, for example, after every single AOG, aircraft on ground incident, so there is like a part that is missing and the aircraft cannot fly anymore, they would do like a whole post-mortem investigation. But the reality was, when you have like 300,000 SKUs that you need to keep in stock, to keep the aircraft flying all the time, I mean, having parts that are out of stock, especially when you have some parts that are, $500,000 and above in terms of price point per unit, it's kind of okay to not have them all the time, readily available. So when we investigated was that, for example, for this AOGs, that they were exactly as expected according to the structure of risk of their stocks, so there was no point in doing any kind of investigation. So, and that will be my concluding thought, is that probably the most difficult, I would say, selling point for stochastic optimization is it's fairly unimpressive. It is just something that just hum gently. There is the problem are much less worse. The success are slightly not as extreme, but much more frequent. But again, what do you remember? Do you remember a football team that is winning consistently 70% of their matches for the last 30 years? Or do you remember this one team that keeps losing all their match, but in a row they win 10 matches against the most prestigious teams? So obviously you would remember this absolutely extreme streak of successes and say, oh, this was incredible. And you would completely forget the sort of boring track record where it's just excellent on average, but it's just the average. So you don't remember that. You see, that's the sort of vibe, and I think it's part of accepting that. I would say what you will get out of stochastic optimization is gentle, unimpressive decisions that turned out to be quite good on average. When they are bad, they are, I would say slightly bad. Nothing, you're not going to lose your shirt. There is a lot of damage control going on, and so. That's the funny thing is that at Lokad, when we discuss with our clients, very frequently they have, when we are like in production for a few years, they would actually have little to say. The worst, not the worst, but the best kind of compliment on the other kind is, you know what, you're so uneventful that we are kind of deprioritizing the supply chain. In our list of concern, you're just like having access to running water. It's uneventful, so you don't have to pay that much events. It just works, kind of, and that's okay. That we are not as good. Obviously, supply chains are not as uneventful as water supply, not quite yet, but there is this kind of vibe.
Well, Meinolf, thank you, Joannes. Meinolf, as is custom, we give the closing word to the guests. So the floor is yours, and then we'll close, please.
Yes, well, thanks again for having me, Conor and Joannes. Just to second what Joannes was saying, we frequently find that the operational teams are surprised and their clients are not surprised, and that is exactly what you want. The operational teams are surprised that suddenly things can run so smoothly, where before it was always, once a week you had a day of hell. And all of a sudden, it's like 2 months, and you go like, this just works. And, no craziness, nothing. But what's more important is their clients are no longer surprised because they are suddenly without a service or something like this. And this is what your business is there for. And that's why you should be using this kind of technology in order to run your operations, because you don't want to badly surprise your clients. And then you can drink a very boring margarita on a nice island and enjoy your average returns, which come with very low variance.
Well, gentlemen, I have no further questions. Joannes, thank you very much for your time. Meinolf, an absolute pleasure, and thank you for joining us. And thank you all for watching. We'll hopefully see you next time.